I actually quite like Sir James Dyson, and I think that'll be evident by what I've got to say right now. So this morning, the BBC posted a story that the Labour Party got very excited about, in thinking that they'd unmasked some deep, dark secret or corruption that the Prime Minister has been hiding from the nation. The reality is actually quite different. But you wouldn't know that if you exclusively read the screaming hordes that occupy the virtual cesspit commonly known as Twitter. So texts between the Prime Minister and Dyson, in which Boris promised to fix a tax issue that would have seen employees of Dyson that are working on COVID ventilators, or were working on COVID ventilators, during that stage of the pandemic. Cast your minds back and think of what it was like at that point. They would have been penalised for coming here to help us out. I mean, the ventilators, at the end of the day, we didn't actually use them, but this was at the stage in which we thought we absolutely crucially would. During that emergency, these people wanted to come here. Dyson wanted these people, his staff, to come here to ensure that we could get the very best people doing very vital work. And leader of the Labour Party, Sir Keir Starmer, has said that this is evidence that there's one rule for those that have the Prime Minister's phone number and another for everyone else. But folks, I want to just make my case to you today that Sir James Dyson has done a hell of a lot more for this country than any Labour Party MP attempting to crucify him on Twitter today. And I'll tell you that for free. Here's why I reckon it's clearly a non-story. The Dyson ventilator, at a time of national crisis, as I say, when we really needed to get our hands on as many as possible of those ventilators, whilst we were scrambling about trying to get hold of as many during very fierce national, not only national actually, international demand, fearing that there would be an influx of patients with pneumonia-like symptoms when we didn't really know much about the coronavirus, who would be unable to breathe without an aid, without that ventilator. And it was so bad that the BBC medical drama Holby City donated 2 fully working ventilators from its set to the NHS's Nightingale Hospital, that hospital that was popped up in London, I don't know if you remember, a sort of makeshift hospital. They donated a BBC drama donated 2 fully working ventilators. That's how desperate things were for the NHS. Very desperate times, I think it's safe to say. Taxes were waived and voted through by Parliament to get doctors, engineers and medical equipment onto these shores. And guess what, folks? The Labour Party didn't object to any of those measures then. They only do it now in an attempt to weaponise the issue and pass it off as some form of Tory sleaze. But I don't know about you. I actually like the fact that my Prime Minister was engaging with an entrepreneur like Sir James Dyson, someone with a proven track record of being able to manufacture really quite successful, ingenious in fact, items that we use every day, we take advantage of every day. I've got the Hoover downstairs. I'm not going to put it on now. In fact, I tell you what, who I live with will be absolutely delighted if I did. But I think we've got to just look at what Sir Keir Starmer said on ventilators at the time and sort of try and get it into our heads just how desperate things were for little old Blighty. So Sir Keir said here, the ventilator challenge, capital letters of course, is an example of how UK manufacturers, a world-class workforce, and Unite the Union have come together to provide our NHS with the vital equipment it urgently needs. Where's the sort of nod to Dyson, right? This was in 2020, he posted this, March 2020. He didn't then argue that these people were guilty of, I don't know, mass greed. I think as Guido Fawkes have very eloquently argued, we saw with the AstraZeneca vaccine. At no profit, they offered that at no profit to them, and they've been met with nothing but criticism, more markedly from the EU. A very unwelcome headache, I dare say, for those in AstraZeneca. Dyson spent £20 million, 20 million quid of his own dosh to manufacture a new ventilator, and he's been hounded by a bunch of career politicians, many of whom agree that the Prime Minister did the right thing. And this is evidenced by the BBC's Politics Live show earlier today, when Labour's shadow cabinet member Lucy Powell MP, I believe she's the business secretary, but to be honest with you, I've absolutely no idea who's in Labour's shadow cabinet anymore. It's that week. But this is Lucy Powell on BBC Politics Live, basically saying Sir Keir Starmer would have done exactly the same thing in Boris Johnson's position.
Ventilators. Are you saying Keir Starmer would have responded differently if he'd been in Boris Johnson's situation? That if he was Prime Minister during a major pandemic and he had an urgent need for life-saving equipment like ventilators, and he got a text from a businessman prepared to make those ventilators for the NHS, if he got help or reassurance with his tax status, that Keir Starmer would say no?
Well, look, I think you've got to separate out some of these issues here.
Well, what would he do in response?
Of course, you would expect a Prime Minister in that time of crisis to do whatever it takes to encourage and support British industry to help meet the demand of the time, whether it be ventilators, PPE, or hand sanitizers, or feeding hungry school children and so on, as thousands and thousands of businesses around the country did during
So your answer is
that time.
yes, Keir Starmer would have done exactly the same.
Exactly. So Keir Starmer would have done exactly the same. Joe Coburn, I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you very much. The BBC actually doing some pretty good journalism there. Great to see. Even Tony Blair, folks, remember him this morning? He said that there has to be a degree of understanding about the Prime Minister for actually getting help from the likes of Dyson. Why should entrepreneurs that are helping out the country at a time of national emergency, why would they rush to our aid if they'll be punished by the taxman for doing so? I just think that this is entirely cartoon. And I tell you what, if you want to focus on the latest Downing Street's £2.6 million room that was supposed to beam Downing Street's press briefings out to the world, being shelved, so they're not going to do that anymore. This £2.6 million room has been built for nothing, because they've decided actually it's a bad idea, we don't want to do it because we'll be far too open to scrutiny and ridicule and all the rest of it. We were supposed to get the Prime Minister's spokeswoman, Allegra Stretton, answering questions every single day. That's not going to happen anymore. It's currently just going to be offered to a small lobby of newspaper journalists, and that's been completely shelved. That, to me, looks more like, and despite the fact, I don't know if you agree with me, but despite the fact that the room itself looks more like a set of the Jeremy Kyle show, as opposed to a room out of which the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland would communicate with the nation from, putting all that to one side, it's clearly been a complete waste of cash. But anyway, at a time when the government is of course spending billions of pounds every single day on lockdown, I guess 2.6 million quid is loose change. But it's these sort of things, PPE for example, contracts that were given out, which no doubt will get a whole load of scrutiny in the not too distant future. Those sort of things are what Labour should be, I think, really focusing in on, instead of this relentless determination to go after a businessman who's done well, an entrepreneur who's done well, an entrepreneur who still employs people, very senior people who are designing really quite ingenious items of technology here in this country. Stop attacking people that have done well. I think Sir James Dyson is a brilliant man, and I think he did us a real service in building that ventilator. We might not have used it, but he spent £20 million of his own cash trying to come up with one that we could use at a time of a national crisis. In my eyes, that is not worthy of a tax from any politician, never mind the leader of Her Majesty's most loyal opposition. Reasoned relies upon grassroots donations from people like yourself that want us to continue producing our high quality, free thinking content. So please do consider clicking the link and donating, no matter how big, no matter how small, because it really does ensure that we can keep on keeping on